First, I want to say that I'm very happy to be with you this morning, and I'm very happy that this conference takes place. I'm very happy because I think that, and you know it, everything that made America great is in danger. And it's people like you who can't take care of it. I hope people like me too. I chose America, I live in America, and I don't want to accept the destruction of this country by ugly leftists. I know what leftists can do. I left Western Europe, but I'm from Western Europe. And I could see what leftists did in Western Europe. America must not be destroyed. I'm going to talk about my country and about what's happening in Europe. I will describe the present situation, but first I want to speak about birth rates. Almost nobody speaks about birth rates, and it's very important to speak about it. Birth rates in all Europe are way below the replacement rate. In the UK and in Belgium, the number is 1.7 child per woman. In Germany and in Hungary, it's 1.5. In Poland, it's 1.4. In Italy and in Spain, it's 1.3. Can you imagine? In the Netherlands, it's 1.6. And according to me, these numbers indicate very pessimistic countries and a kind of collective suicide. So I start with something that is not funny, but I had to say it in the beginning. And in France, the number looks much better. In France, the number is 2 children per woman. So many people say to me, oh, you don't have to be pessimistic. In France, the numbers are very good. That's not true. The situation in France is worse, and these numbers indicate that the situation is worse. France has the largest Muslim population in Europe. And if you put side by side the birth rate of the Muslim population and the birth rate of the non-Muslim population, you understand what I mean. The birth rate of the Muslim population is a little more than the double of the birth rate of the non-Muslim population. So this difference has consequences. Today, 12% of the French population is Muslim. Within 20 years, and demography is an exact science, when people are 1 year old, you know how many of them will be 20, 19 years later. So within 20 years, a little more than 20% of the French population will be Muslim. And after that, the percentage will climb. The percentage will be much higher. And I could say that these estimates are strictly based on the birth rates. If you add migrants that are still coming, that are still arriving in France, the situation looks darker. 400,000 migrants arrive every year in France. And do I have to say it? Almost all of them, sometimes all of them, are Muslim. If you add that every year, thousands of people leave the country, you can see that the future is really, really dark. I could add that I think that it's easy to guess. Most of the Muslim migrants come from underdeveloped countries, have no marketable skills, rely on welfare to survive, and will rely on welfare for the rest of their lives. It's almost a certainty. I could add that all of those who leave the country, and there is 20,000 to 30,000 each year, almost all of those who leave the country, maybe all of them, are non-Muslim, have marketable skills and a high and sometimes very high intellectual capital. I think you understand where it leads. There is a population change, but there is much more than that. There is a cultural and intellectual change, but there is much more. France is on the road leading to bankrupt welfare systems. It's almost the case now. More poverty, less growth, or no growth at all. And yes, you have Islam. France will not become a totally Muslim country, but France is right now, and it will not be better later. France is a country colonized by Islam. And I think that the word colonized is appropriate. It's a fact. More and more Muslims who come to live in France or who live in France do not integrate. Most of them impose their way of life. Most of them impose submission, not only to the people, but to the authorities. And they can scare politicians. They can scare journalists. I remember when I was in France, when I was speaking on TV, the next day, Muslims, could stop me in the street, take both of my hands and say, "Hey, we don't like what you say." And it was clear that there was a message, and I didn't like the message. I looked at them, they had a knife in their pocket, you never know. And so it's one of the reasons I decided to leave France. I could say, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons. So polls, you have polls about that. Polls show that 29% of the Muslim population of the country wants to live strictly according to Sharia rules. 29%. And if you look the percentage concerning young people, it's much worse. People aged 18 to 30 wants to live according to Sharia rules also, but the number is 49% of them. Almost 50. And I think that very soon it will be 50. I could say that it's logical. Islam says that there is no law above Sharia. And Islam says that there is no political leader above Allah. It's almost impossible to say it in France, but we still live in a free country, so I can say it here. Islam says that Muslims must not integrate into a non-Muslim society. So I could say Muslims who want to live according to Sharia rules are good Muslims. Muslims who integrate are bad Muslims. You have to understand that if you want to understand clearly the situation. 25 years ago, you had around approximately 200 no-go zones in France. Today, you have around 630 no-go zones in France. 3 times more, and they are much, much bigger. I went one time with my friend Daniel Pipes to some of these areas. He loves risks, well, so we went there. So I was his driver, so I could drive quickly if it was necessary. So, no-go zones are zones where the police is not allowed to enter because it could lead to riots. So, for example, if you rob a bank, and if you're a Muslim, you have to run to a no-go zone and the police will stop, as if you had crossed a border. These zones are ruled by gangs and by imams. An Algerian writer, Boualem Sansal, said that they are small Islamic republics on the French territory, and that they are not French territory anymore. And it's not me, it's an Algerian writer who is born Muslim and who still says that he's a Muslim. It's much better for him, so he will not be killed immediately. Sometimes gang members and people like them are arrested and become inmates for a few months. It never lasts very, very long. Justice in France is very weak at the rest of the authorities. And it's enough for them to learn many things. And I could say that almost all the terrorists who killed in France and in other European countries these last few years were coming from French prisons. So they learned good things in French prisons. 70% of the inmates in French prisons are Muslims. So on one side you have 12% of the population, on the other side you have 70% of the inmates. The numbers, according to me, are interesting. So it's official numbers, so nobody could say that I have a prejudice. The result of all of this is that a large part of the French non-Muslim population is not only extremely pessimistic, no, a large part of the French population is increasingly angry. Non-Muslim French people become poorer, and non-Muslim French people have to flee territories changed into no-go zones. They would want the government to do something, and they see that the government is doing strictly nothing. I could say that what's happening in France will happen in many other European countries. European governments, and the French government obviously, know what is happening. They also know if they say something different, the media will shout that they say something awful and they don't want to take risk. They also know that if they act, widespread riots may break out. In France, it did happen in 2005. You had riots all over the country. And I could say that if I speak about France, the French government, I know many politicians, I was a political advisor for people who are ministers in the past. Many politicians think that maybe it's too late. That's the reality. You have politicians who try to resist, some journalists who try to resist, they are immediately called fascist. I could explain how we got there, but somebody said to me that I didn't have a lot of time left. So I'm sorry, because I wanted to explain how did we get there, but maybe it will be, I will have the opportunity to do it another time. And I could say that I would love to think that it's possible to do something for France, and I would hope that it would be possible to do something for Europe. But I'm very pessimistic. But if I said what I said in the beginning, it's because I think it's not too late for America, and that what is happening in Europe could help to learn lessons. Don't let this happen here. Never. And we must see that the survival of the United States is at stake, and the survival of the United States will be at stake in 2020. You know it. We have to do something about it. Maybe it will be the topic of another lecture, because I had many, many other things to say, but anyway, I thank you for your attention.